Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining our How to Get Published webinar. Before we get started, I'd just like to go over a few items so that you know how to participate in tonight's event. If you've joined listening using your computer speaker system, and that works for you, then that's fine. But if you would prefer, you can also join over the telephone. So to do this, you just need to select phone call in the audio section of your panel, and the dial-in information will be displayed for you. We welcome your questions at any time during the webinar. You can just type them into the questions section of your control panel. We'll try to address as many as we can at the end of this evening's presentation. Before we begin, I'd just like to draw your attention to the handouts section as well, where we've included some additional materials about IOP publishing content, and these are provided for you in Arabic. So our speaker tonight is Piera De Macara. She is a publisher in the journal's development team at IOP Publishing. She joined IOP in 2017 after completing her postdoc in the field of nanomaterials for heterogeneous catalysts and biomass conversion. Her academic background and expertise in materials science make her the ideal publisher for the materials portfolio, and particularly for the IOP journals that she manages, which include Nanotechnology, Nano Futures, Nano Express, and Materials Research Express. So Piera will be giving a 45-minute presentation all about how to get your research published. So let me hand over to Piera now for the presentation.
Thank you very much, Emma, for the kind introduction, and thank you all for joining in and tuning in to this webinar today. So I'm going to share my screen, so hopefully you can see it. And sorry, can you see my screen, Emma? Like, okay?
Yes, it's perfect. I can see your screen.
Okay. Thank you. So yes, today I'm going to give you a presentation on how to get published, and I would like to go through some of the topics. First of all, I would like to introduce ourselves and IOP Publishing, as well as IOP journals. Why publish at all? That's the main questions really. And then I will try to give you tips on how to choose your journal and how to write your paper, and then sum up this section with a top 10 tips for getting published. We will then focus a little bit on the peer review process and touch on publication ethics, and then cover post-acceptance and post-publication. So let's start with introducing IOP and publishing and who we are. So this is the headquarters of IOP Publishing. We are based in Bristol in the UK. We are wholly owned by the Institute of Physics, which is based in London, and all the money that we made goes to back to the Institute of Physics, which is a leading scientific society promoting physics and physicists since 1874. As a society publisher, we are embedded in the community we serve. Our mission is to deliver impact, recognition, and value to the scientific community. We have over 300 staff worldwide, lots of whom are usually based in the headquarters in Bristol, but currently and since last year, all IOP Publishing employees are working from home at the moment. We publish more than 80 journals based on physics and physical sciences, and we also have an ebook program and an award-winning science journalism, which include Physics World. I've given you the link of our homepage, iopscience.iop.org. Please feel free to have a look at this page and explore our range of products. Our headquarters, as I mentioned, is in Bristol in the UK. However, we do have offices and representatives throughout the world, some in China, India, Japan, the US, and we also have a representative based in Egypt, till Cairo as well. We are very pleased to see that our submissions and acceptances from Egypt have been increasing in recent year, which is very promising. And of course, we are looking forward to publish more and more articles from Egypt in the next future. Hopefully, how to get published webinars like this one will contribute to this trend with better written targeted papers. So how to access our journals and ebooks. IOP has an agreement with the Egyptian Knowledge Bank that allows researchers and readers, public and private universities, research institutions and libraries in Egypt to access all of our journals, all IOP journals and ebooks for free. So do take a look at the links that I've given here to really explore our full list of journals and ebooks. As we mentioned and Emma mentioned before, the recordings will be circulated afterwards, so don't need to write these links now. You can come back to them later. Before jumping into the core of the talk, I would like to give a shout out to Dr. Helam Fadley, who recently was awarded second place for the Nanotechnology Young Researchers Award 2020 for her important breakthrough in semiconductor technology. She has also been awarded Physics World 2020 Breakthrough of the Year. Our team at Physics World has recently interviewed her, and you can listen to her interview on our Physics World homepage. So do check it out, and congratulations to Helam. There's one other thing that I would like to touch on before moving on to the core of our talk, and it's the Peer Review Excellence e-learning hub. To boost peer review knowledge and competency for a future generation of reviewers, we have launched a new e-learning hub on peer review excellence. Every student who passes the course will be invited to submit a review for one of our relevant journals. If the reviewer, their review is completed to the expected standard, they will become an IOP trusted reviewers, which is an accolade they can share on their CV. So do have a look at the website here as well. Right, so moving on to the content of the talk, the first thing I would like to cover in the first question I would like to answer really is why publish at all? There are important reasons to publish your own work, to share knowledge, to take the field forward, to validate your research, and to help your career and reputation, but also publishing a paper in a peer-reviewed, reputable academic journal is the universal way in which scientists can communicate their research. So it's certainly a key part of the scientific process. So let's talk about how choosing the right journal for your work. Deciding on the right journal for your paper is not a decision to be taken lightly. There is quite a bit of work into it. So you want to work, first of all, with a publisher that you trust, and not all publishers can be trusted out there. There are many considerations that will affect the choice of your journal, such as the scope of the journal, the audience who will be reading your paper, the reputation of a journal, the speed of publication. And so it's really great idea to decide where you want to submit your paper before you even begin writing it, because that can really affect how you write your paper. IOP tries to make it as easy as possible for you to publish your work with us, and we have options within our journal to meet the needs for authors at every stage of their career, which we'll talk a little bit in a few minutes. What are the things that you should consider when choosing the journal to publish in? For example, audience is really important because you want to know who's going to be reading your work. The scope and the relevance of the journal. Does the journal publish other similar papers? Is it theoretical or experimental? Does your topic fit the scope of the journal? Is the journal a broad scope or a specialized journal mainly read by a smaller specialized community? You want to think about who you actually want to read your paper. The editorial board is another important factor. Do you recognize anyone on the board? The reputation of the journal and of course the publisher. The journal impact factor, which I will cover in a little bit more detail in just a minute. The quality criteria, as well the probability that your paper will be accepted, the speed of publication of your chosen journal, whether the journal publishes on an open access or subscription basis, which again I'll cover in a few minutes, and whether there's any cost involved in publication. Sometimes there aren't, but sometimes that could be page charges or charges for the color printing or article processing charges, for example, if it's an open access journal. There's a very good website. You can find the link on this slide. It's called Think, Check, Submit, and which basically has a checklist of things you want to consider when deciding where to publish a paper. And it's a good website, so I encourage you to check it out. So as I mentioned, I would like to give you a little bit more details on a couple of things, the impact factor and the open access option. So although controversial, the main measure of the quality of a journal is still Web of Science impact factor. By definition, the impact factor is a scientometric index calculated by Clarivate that reflects the yearly average number of citations of articles published in the last 2 years in a given journal. In this slide, I've reported an example of a calculation for an impact factor. So for instance, if you would like to know the impact factor of 2017 for a given journal, all you need to do is to divide the number of citations that the article published in 2015 and 2016 have received in 2017 by the number of articles published in 2015 and 2016, and you get the impact factor for that year. Scopus, so basically it's a measure of how much the papers in that journal are cited on average over a period of 2 years, and it really does vary from subject to subject, from field to field, but what we can say is that, for example, in physics, an impact factor of 2 or above is good, and 3 or above is very good. Scopus is Elsevier database and gives an alternative version of the Clarivate impact factor because it draws from a wider pool than the Clarivate impact factor does. But there are other measures that you can use to try to gauge the quality of a paper. For example, the downloads. You can have a look at the number of times a paper has been downloaded, and this gives you an idea of the usage of your paper. And there are also other metrics, for example, Altimetric scores, and this gives you an idea on how your article is appreciated and has appeared on social media, blogs, etc. Actually, most publishers now share their usage statistics and certainly will do on request. So that's also very important. This slide shows an example of some of our journals and the range of impact factors. At IOP, there are several different tiers of journals. So some journals have very high impact factor, and for example, reports on progress in physics has an impact factor over 17. Other journals, like Materials Research Express, for example, have a lower impact factor, but our peer review process allows for transfer between them. As mentioned before, it's worth keeping in mind that impact factor are field specific, and for a physics journal, an impact factor of 2 is already considered good. But again, do also consider other metrics when you want to gauge the quality of the journal, because it will give you a bigger picture. At IOP, we also have a wide range of express titles, which are more inclusive journals, and they are mainly focusing on scientific rigor rather than perceived impact. We have a range of these journals covering various subject areas, and they are a really good and valid option, a publication option. publishing option, sorry. You can see a list of our express journals on these slides. We go from biomedical topics to materials to pure physics and plasma research and so on. MRX, for example, is one of our larger titles covering all material science, and recently moved to an open access model and publishes basically around 1,500 articles per year. The other thing I wanted to consider I want you to consider when choosing a journal is the open access option. So traditionally, journals operate the subscription model, where usually authors publish their paper for free and libraries pay for access. Authors are generally allowed to self-archive their accepted manuscript on a public repository, and this is called the green open access. Many journals, actually all IOP's journals, subscription journals, are now hybrid, and that means they give you the option to publish open access within a subscription model. In the past 10 years, the number of pure gold open access journals has increased, and basically on a gold open access journal, the final published article is made freely available upon payment of an article processing charge, or APC. The APC is usually paid to the publisher by the author or via the funder, and articles are published under a CC BY license, which allow reuse. So let's move on to the submissions requirement for IOP. As we mentioned before, IOP aims to make submission process as simple as possible to authors, so we don't have, for example, any set submission formats for your manuscript. You can send supplementary data, you can upload the file directly from the archive. For initial submission, we only require a PDF, and we will ask you for the source file only at a later stage. You can send us your compressed and archived file, and then a tip that I would like to give you is that it's really good idea to check the homepage of the individual journals, because individual journals may have specific requirements. So it's also a good idea if you are publishing with IOP to check our general author guidelines, and I've given you the link on this slide. And here I'm actually showing you how the main page of the author guidelines look like on our support page. Here you can find basically our recently updated guidelines for authors, which has all of the relevant information, such as step-by-step guides and instructions on writing your paper, choosing a journal, as well as what to expect from peer review and so on. So I really encourage you to have a look at these guidelines. It's really good information. Right, so that's all for choosing a journal. Let's move on to the next section, which is all about writing your paper. Right, okay, so before we start, you start writing your paper, you should look at the main results and ask yourself, are they novel enough? Are they important enough? Do they fill a gap in the research field? Do you have enough to write about your work, and is it really worth publishing? You should then consider what your choice of journal requires, and decide on the key message of your paper and prepare an outline. The outline usually or structure includes the headings, the topic you're going to touch on, the context, and the significance of your result. The structure of your paper will vary from field to field, but generally you will require a title, an abstract, introduction, methods, results, discussion, conclusion, acknowledgements, figures, and maybe some supplementary material. So let's analyze each of them individually. The title. So the title is the most visible part of your paper, and it's also what reviewers will use to gauge whether they want to review your paper or not. So you will want probably to spend a little bit of time thinking about your title and make it right. You want to be concise yet informative and draw the attention of the reader. Bear in mind that a lot of readers will be using a search engine such as Google, so you want a title that makes your paper easily discoverable. Some does and don't. Do you keep it simple enough? Be clear and descriptive. Use key terms. Don't be ambiguous. Don't use phrases or jokes that may not translate to an international audience. Don't use acronyms. It's always best to spell them in the title and in the abstract at least. Your abstract, again, it's one of the first things that your readers will see, and it is what reviewers will use to gauge whether they want to review your paper or not too. So it's essentially your shop window. It should summarize the paper in one paragraph. It should include your key results and let the reader know what you actually achieved so that they get an idea basically what to expect from the full paper. Bear also in mind that your abstract should be suitable for inclusion in abstracting services. Do include keywords or phrases. Be clear about what makes this paper worth reading. Summarize your aim, methodology, and findings. Don't just copy your introduction. Remember, you want to talk about your findings as well. Don't use jargon or undefined acronyms or words that are not commonly used, and don't exaggerate or mislead about your findings. Moving on to the introduction. The introduction should describe the main goals and advances of your in your paper. It should give an overview of the methods, and it should set the work in the context of previous research and obviously cite all relevant references. The methods need to give enough information to allow the reproduction of your results. Now, this is very important because you want to make sure that everyone and anyone that reads your paper is able to replicate your key results. There have been a lot of cases where high-profile papers have been retracted because the results were not reproducible. So be careful with that. The results and discussion section need to show the significance and impact of your results, and compare results to other published work, and discuss the implications and applications of your work. Your conclusions need to summarize the major points of your work, highlight the novelty and significance of your research, and include your plans for future work. In the final section of your paper, you will have also the acknowledgement and then the references. The acknowledgements must recognize the contribution of funders or any other assistants. They must declare any ethical approval. For example, if your paper has results that come from animal testing or human testing, you will probably need to declare the ethical approval there. And then in the reference list, you need to cite the right references, obviously relevant to your work. You will need to include both historical and recent original works. Check for accuracy, making sure that you are citing reference correctly, and follow the reference style of the journal. Some journals have a style, some don't, but if there isn't one, just be consistent within your own paper. Your paper may also contain figures, diagrams, and charts. You will need to make sure that these are representative, clear, and well designed. Remember that figures are often the first thing that readers' attention will be drawn to when they look at your paper. So it's worth spending a little bit of time on them and to get them looking good, and especially please use high resolution images. Make sure figure captions contain relevant keywords and are self-contained. So basically a reader can understand the figure without having to refer to the text. One top tip would be consider how your figures might be used. For example, they might be used as possible journal cover image, or to illustrate the news items, or on social media for Twitter posts or Facebook or blogs, and of course in posters and marketing materials. Last but not least, it's actually a very important thing to do at the end when you've written your paper. It is to get feedback and comments before you submit your article to the journal. So hand your paper to your peers, to your colleagues, to your supervisor, and get comment from them. If your university has an internal peer review process, make use of that. Then sit back and make changes following any feedback you get, and this will definitely save valuable time in the peer review process. And also bear in mind that if a reviewer can't understand the English, the paper will be rejected. So if you need help with the English, you can either ask for help from a fluent English speaker, a colleague or a supervisor, for example, or use our service Editage. This is a service that IOP is partnered with to help authors with English, but also scientific editing. Right, so to sum up this section, I would like to give you the top 10 tips for successfully writing up your research. Check the literature for similar results in your field first before you submit. Use references that show context of your work and why it is new and significant. Decide whether you are writing for a specialist or non-specialist audience, and remember your paper must be easy for that audience to understand. Choose which journal you want to publish in before writing your paper, and spend a lot of time on your title and abstract. This will be what most people will see first and will judge your work on. Keep abbreviation or technical terms to a minimum, or clearly define them at first use. Avoid speculation, exaggeration, or anecdotes. Keep to the facts and clearly state your conclusions. Keep it clear and concise, even when there are no word limits, and use your own words. Allow plenty of time for rewriting, and of course, get feedback from colleagues before submitting your article. Okay. Let's now, pardon me, let's now move on to the second half of this webinar and cover the peer review process. The peer review is the process whereby experts in the field assess an academic paper before deciding whether or not it should be published. It's a vital part of publishing. It's not perfect, but it's broadly supported by the academic community and is the best system that we have. It's a critical filter for millions of research papers written every year. It gives the scientific community and the public a reliable indicator on what to believe. And it gives authors a feedback that can help to improve their paper, and also helps editors decide what to publish. So here's a diagram that shows, that gives you an overview of what the process looks like at IOP. So starting from the left-hand side of this diagram, a paper is submitted. Then the staff at IOP will check it, and basically if it fills the initial criteria for the journal, and assuming that it does, it is sent out for peer review. After peer review, your paper could be accepted and published straight away, although this is quite unusual for that to happen without revision, but it does occasionally happen. A paper can be rejected, or often an author is asked to make a revision or amendments to their paper, and it might go back to the peer review. Then after revised and being peer reviewed, it could be accepted or rejected, or again could go around the cycle and have another one or more rounds of revision after that. Let's now look at these steps in a little bit more detail. The first step is what we call the pre-refereeing. Our editorial team assesses all submissions against some initial criteria, including check for scope, quality of content, and novelty. They are look here for a substantial step forward rather than an incremental advance. We use a plagiarism detection software called Authenticate to help us detect plagiarism or duplication in paper. And when necessary, we may consult the journal editorial board on the scope or the quality or novelty of the paper. And if the paper is not suitable, it can be rejected at this stage, or a transfer could be offered to one of our other journals if we think it would be more appropriate for one of our other journals. If the paper passes all these checks, then it will be sent out for peer review. Now, onto reviewer selection. So we choose our reviewers on the basis of their subject expertise, independence, availability, reliability, meaning that we go through their previous record basically and see how they performed. We also consider reviewers that the author suggests as well. Most of our journals currently operate single blind peer review, which means that the reviewers know the identity of the authors and the authors do not know the identity of their reviewers. However, this is going to change. Last year, IOP Publishing committed to move all its journal to double blind, or what we call it now, double anonymous, by the end of 2021, as it basically eliminates any unconscious bias. We also have transparent peer review. It's actually trialed on some of our journal. Transparent peer review is basically when it's an opt-in service, and it's when the authors and reviewers can choose to make the reports and peer review history of the article public when it's published. The reviewers can also choose to disclose their identity at this stage if they wish. Some more details on the double anonymous peer review. Since all journals will move to that by the end of the year, I'd like to just explain that a little bit more into details. So double anonymous peer review is where both authors and reviewers are anonymous to each other. Why we're doing this? So double anonymous has the potential to reduce bias with respect to gender, race, country of origin, or affiliation, and we hope that it should lead to a more equitable system. But how will it work really? So authors are expected to anonymize their work, and IOP will not share any information about the author's identity, including country or institution, with the reviewers. However, we are not going to reject the submission on the basis that the author have included their information. If the authors include their details on the manuscript, we will then proceed process the submission via single blind peer review and respect obviously the choice of the author. So in other words, authors can still choose a single blind peer review if they wish, but the double anonymous will be the default option, especially starting from January 2022. Okay, so back to peer review and the process. After the paper has been reviewed, it's time to make a first decision. Normally, it requires at least 2 reviewers' reports. We will consult an adjudicator or editorial board member if the 2 reviewers disagree. Typically, it takes a month or 2, depending also on the journal, to get the reports back. Generally, reviewers are asked to rate scientific rigor, novelty, and significance, but that again depends on the journal. As we mentioned before, our express titles only require scientific rigor rather than novelty. For most of our journals, the decision is then made by the IOP editorial team based on the reviewers' reports. An immediate acceptance is unusual, as I mentioned before, but again, it does happen. More often, authors are asked for revisions based on their reviewers' comments and requests. Rejection rate can be quite high for some journals, especially high quality journals. It could be up to 50% or even more sometimes. But however, when that happens, authors are often offered a transfer to a more suitable journal within our portfolio. But I will come to that in a little bit more details and explain a little bit more what happened when a paper is rejected. Once you receive the reviewer comments, this is what we suggest you respond to them. So it is important not to express any frustration with reviewers. Being asked to revise is actually a great sign. It means that reviewers see merit in your work and it fits this journal. So if you were asked to revise your paper, here's what we suggest. Read each reviewer's report carefully, take your time, respond to each and every comment specifically, keep a list of all your changes and highlight them in the revised manuscript to make the reviewer's job a little bit easier in case the paper goes back to them. If you disagree with the reviewers, that's okay. Clearly and politely explain why. Never ignore a comment. If you don't understand something, then raise a query with the editorial office. And remember, this is free advice, so use it. It could be a really good way to really improve your paper. Okay, so following revision, you revise your paper, you send it back to us, and if the revision is satisfactory, then the paper will be accepted. It could be rejected if the revisions are not satisfactory, or you might be asked to make further revision and you go back to the cycle again for more rounds of peer review. So what if the paper is rejected then? First of all, and I would say, like, don't panic. Nearly everyone has been rejected at some point. Use the advice you received to improve your paper. You can rewrite the paper and resubmit it to another journal, and that obviously assuming the science is not the issue. As mentioned before, different tiers of journals are available, and if the paper wasn't quite suitable for your first choice of journal, there might be another one more suitable where you have a stronger chance of being accepted. Also, if you think the decision was wrong, most journals give you an opportunity to appeal. On the contrary, if your paper is accepted, then congratulations, it's time to celebrate. You will receive an accepted letter starting with paper with your stating, sorry, that your paper was accepted. It's not the end of the story yet, because you might need to sign copyright form, provide proof of permissions for reproduced figures, upload the source file. This is the time when actually we ask you to upload the source file for your manuscript, and the reviewer reports at this stage might be published alongside your article if you have the opt-in, and if your journal has also transformative agreement option. That said, I'm going to have a brief discussion on what is always quite a big topic in publishing, and it's publication ethics. So papers should be written in an ethical way. It's a big issue, especially when high-profile papers are retracted, and they are usually well read and well cited. And especially, like, if you think about papers written on medicine and health issues, then it can have major consequences, right? So it's very important to get it right. Some example of serious misconduct could be plagiarism, falsification, or data fabrication and manipulation. At IOP, we routinely use Authenticate, which is a plagiarism detection tool on submissions. And IOP is a member of COPE. Actually, the COPE is the Committee of Publication Ethics and gives us advice on handling misconduct cases. You can read more about our ethical policy on our publishing support page, and I've given you the link here. I do encourage you to do so, to just go there and have a look before you submit your paper. So let's move on to the 10 top tips on publishing ethically then. So be honest in making claims for the results and conclusions of your research. Credit all those that have made a significant contribution. Check your funder's copyright or open access policy. Disclose funding and any potential conflict of interest. Get permission to reuse anything you haven't created yourself. Respond to all reviewers' comments, even if you don't agree. Don't fabricate, falsify, or mispresent data or results. Don't submit an article to more than one journal at the same time. Don't add someone as a co-author without their permission. Don't sign any forms on behalf of your co-authors unless you are authorized to do so. Don't copy and paste text from other articles, including your own. These may be classed as plagiarism or duplicate publication. And last but not least, don't take any criticism of your work from reviewers personally, and don't be abusive. Okay, so the final section of this talk is on post-acceptance and what happens basically once your paper is accepted. Accepted manuscript may be made available online within 24 hours of acceptance with the citable DOI, so people can start citing it almost as soon as it's been accepted. You can promote your work to your peer as soon as it is accepted, and you can do it by email, social media, etc. So it's basically an earlier opportunity for your research to be read and cited, even before the final version is published. Before going online as final version, your paper will go through the proof stage. Here, your paper will be edited to meet the format of the journal, and this may include an edit for English. You will be asked to carefully check the proof of your paper, and this is really your last chance to make any minor corrections. Your correction will be made, and then the paper will be published online. You will be informed and sent a link to your published paper. Print publication will follow sometimes later if your journal also is printed. Usually it takes about a month for us to publish your paper since it's been accepted. Now on to the most important part. So what happened post-publication and how to get your work visible and impactful. There are lots of things actually you can do to help your paper be read and cited more. You can, for instance, contact colleagues in your field and people you've referenced. You can send a link to the paper, for example. You can use social media. Twitter is very recommended. There's a lot of researchers there, and the discussion is very active. Blog, you can use your own blog or update your institutional, departmental, or personal homepage. You can contact your institution press office if you have one. And you can promote your publication at conferences, obviously. You can engage with Kudos. There's a link there to this website. It's a cloud-based platform through which researchers and readers can accelerate and broaden the positive impact of their research, and it's free to use. But we do also play our part. There are things that we can do as well to help promote your work. We can promote your work as part of subject collections and annual highlight collections. We can highlight interesting work using again, social media on our Twitter and Facebook platforms. Journalistic coverage of high interest papers, including community websites like Physics World. And we also press release newsworthy papers. Unfortunately, we can't do all of these for all of the papers that we publish. That will be impossible, but so that means it's really important that you promote your paper yourself. Right, so this is the end of my talk, and I would like to recap the main topics that we covered. So I talked a little bit about ourselves. I've introduced IOP Publishing and IOP journals, and I've mentioned the express titles, and then hopefully answer the question why publish at all. I then covered how to choose the right journal for your work and how to write your paper, and then given you the top 10 tips for getting published. We then focused on the peer review process, touch on publication ethics, and then discuss what happened post-acceptance and post-publication. Here's some further information for you. I've included a link to our publishing support, all of our journals and ebooks. Feel free to have a look and browse around. Thank you all for listening, and I hope you found this webinar useful. And as Emma said, I'm happy to answer some of your questions, but if we don't cover all of them, then we will make sure they are addressed and get back to you. Thanks again and for your attention. Emma, on to you.
Thank you so much, Piera. That was a really great presentation. Yeah, we have had a few questions, so I'll just ask them now, if that's okay. So the first one was, what can I do if I disagree with the reviewer's assessment of my article?
Oh, yes. You can appeal. So if you, for example, if your article is rejected and obviously you don't agree with the decision, then you can submit an appeal against the reject decision. Now, in writing your appeal, it is important that you make sure to address each of the criticism of the reviewers, and where appropriate, for example, include a list of changes and how you would address the point that they raised. Should you feel any of the criticisms are ill-founded, for example, please give a clear explanation then for like why you feel this is the case. And generally, I'd suggest make a case for the interest, the significance, and originality of the work, and how these basically meet the requirement for publication. So why we should reconsider your article. You should also know that the appeal process, it can be quite lengthy. So and when we finally come to the final decision, that decision is the final one. So we can't change that again.
Okay, thank you very much, Piera. We've also had a question which is, can I post my manuscript on a preprint server and still submit it to a journal?
Yes, you can do that. Actually, you can post your article on a non-commercial repository such as Archive, but you can't do that on commercial ones. For example, ResearchGate is one of them, so you can't do that. If a paper is already on Archive, for example, you can directly submit that article from their website to one of our journals. The only caveat with this, with preprints in general, is that the author must retain the copyright, and they, for example, can't make the preprint available under the CC BY license. Hope that answered.
Yeah. Okay. Great. And then we've also had, what would the threshold be for plagiarism? So how much overlap with previously published work is considered unacceptable and would result in the article being rejected?
Right. That's a good question. As I mentioned, we use Authenticate, and first of all, I would say we treat this on a case-by-case basis, and we try to use common sense when it comes to this. So basically, so as I mentioned earlier, we do use the Authenticate, and the Authenticate produce a report. And if we see that there's a number of sentences that have overlapped with previous work, that and those sentences are mostly in the introduction, that should be fine. However, if it's more than that, that is a problem. So, for example, if there's a whole paragraph copied, or a section, or like images not like taken and copied without a reference, that in that case there's an issue, and the paper can be rejected because at that point we start questioning the novelty of the work, right? If there's anything novel at all in that paper. Most of the time, if the overlap is too much, but at the same time can be explained, we go usually back to the authors and ask them to either give us an explanation, but also ask them to rewrite the section and address the overlap. So we try to give them an opportunity to rewrite the paper, and it can either happen that we unsubmit the article and allow them more time to resubmit the revised version, and that usually helps a lot. But sometimes we do have to reject the manuscript.
Okay, thank you very much for that answer, Piera. Thanks to everyone in the audience who's asked a question. And if we didn't get to your question, then we have received it, and we will be able to contact you by email with an answer afterwards. Just a quick reminder to check the attachments in the handouts section, which contain more information about IOP Publishing. So that just leaves me to say thank you to Piera, and also to everyone who attended tonight's webinar. Once you leave the webinar, you will receive a survey which just asks you a few questions about the presentation, and we'd really appreciate it if you would complete that, just to provide us with some feedback so that we can make these sessions more useful for you in the future. You'll also receive a follow-up email within 24 hours. That will include a link, as Piera mentioned, which will have the recording of tonight's webinar, so that you can watch it in your own time. And yeah, that just leaves me to say thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. The webinar is now finished.